I've spent nearly 20 years of my life working deep in the most isolated wetlands this country has to offer. Coastal marshes, river deltas, inland swamps. I have navigated them all. I have mapped their channels, measured their waters, and moved through their thickest vegetation without a moment of hesitation. So when people ask me why I refuse to ever return to one specific stretch of swamp, and why I still feel a cold prickle of fear whenever I drive that road, I struggle to put it into words that make sense to anyone else. I simply know what happened to me there. And what haunts me most is the realization that I was never the hunter or the observer. I was the subject. And I was being watched long before I set foot on the trail. This story begins in November of 2019. It had been a wet season, and the water sat heavy and high among the trees, turning solid ground into hidden channels. I was contracted by a conservation group to conduct a full environmental survey several miles from the nearest paved road. It was standard fieldwork, 2 days on site, 1 night camping, measurements, and samples. I had done this exact work hundreds of times. My partner, a man named Ray, was supposed to join me. He called the night before to say a family emergency had come up and he couldn't make the trip. I should have rescheduled. I should have waited. But the weather window was closing fast, and in my arrogance, I told myself I knew the land well enough to manage alone. That was the first error in judgment. I left the truck parked at the old access point just after 4 in the morning. The sky was still black, the air cool and heavy. I began the hike, weighted down with transit levels, range poles, water supplies, and my field notebook. As the gray light of dawn started to filter through the canopy, the swamp woke up around me. The air smelled of wet earth and ancient water. Frogs called out from every hollow. Birds moved through the branches above. Everything was exactly as it should be. That is the detail I need you to understand. Every single moment of that morning was ordinary, predictable, and safe. Right until the exact moment it wasn't. Roughly 40 minutes into the trek, I noticed signs of activity off the main track. Someone had camped there recently. There was a blackened fire ring, ash still holding a faint residual warmth. A blue plastic tarp lay folded neatly under a bush. 2 empty water jugs stood nearby. But what caught my eye and sent the first small shiver down my spine was a pair of rubber boots. They were placed side by side at the edge of the clearing, perfectly upright and clean. It looked as if the person wearing them had simply stepped out of them and walked barefoot directly into the deep mud. I've found squatter camps and hunter shelters out here many times before. It wasn't unheard of. Out of pure habit, the instinct of a surveyor, I pulled out my notebook and marked the coordinates of the site, just a record for the file. Nothing more. I closed the book and kept walking. I reached the survey zone just as the sun began to break properly through the trees. This was the heart of the swamp. The cypress trees here were ancient giants, their massive roots rising out of the black water like twisted hands. Fog drifted low across the surface, blurring the line between land and water. It felt like entering a world untouched by time. I set up my equipment on a slight rise and began my measurements. It is repetitive work. Your hands move automatically while your mind wanders. It was during this routine that the sensation began. It didn't start as fear. It started as a shift in the air. A heaviness at the back of my neck. That biological alarm bell that all wild things possess. The knowledge that you are no longer alone. I stopped working and turned slowly in a full circle. There was nothing there but trees, mist, and shadow. I told myself it was just the isolation playing tricks on my mind and went back to my task. But the feeling did not leave. It grew stronger, heavier, more insistent. After 30 years in the field, I know exactly what nature sounds like. And what I heard, or rather what I stopped hearing, was unnatural. The sounds didn't vanish all at once. That would have been obvious. They were being silenced gradually, section by section, as if a massive invisible hand was sweeping across the landscape, turning off switches. First, the small birds in the undergrowth fell silent. Then, the hum of insects near the water's edge faded away. Then the frogs, group by group, until finally, the very last one croaked once, twice, and then stopped instantly, as if something had reached out and covered its mouth. I lowered my measuring rod. The silence that descended was absolute. It pressed against my ears. It was the silence of a room holding its breath. I tried to rationalize it. An alligator, perhaps. A large predator moving through usually clears a wide radius. I clung to that thought for maybe 4 minutes. Then came the sound. Splash! It was not the crash of a heavy body entering water, nor the light ripple of a small creature. It was calculated, precise. It was the sound of something stepping forward with infinite care, moving so slowly that sound itself was almost avoided, but making just one tiny mistake. It came from behind me. To my right, close, too close. I spun around to face the noise. The mist swirled, but nothing moved. Yet on the dark surface of the water, ripples were expanding outwards in perfect rings, moving away from a point that was now positioned exactly between me and the path I had taken to get here. Whatever it was, it had circled around me. It had anticipated my position. It had deliberately cut off my route to safety. To an observer, I hope I appeared calm. I began dismantling my station and packing my gear slowly, methodically, just a worker finishing a shift. Inside, however, my mind was racing. The nearest road was over an hour away. The terrain was thick and waterlogged. And somewhere in the trees behind me, something was watching, waiting, and thinking. I abandoned the trail completely. I forced my way through the densest brush and deepest water I could find, moving in a wide arc to confuse anything tracking me. It took nearly 2 hours of exhausting, miserable travel, but eventually the trees broke, and I saw the gray ribbon of the road stretching out before me. Solid ground. Civilization. In that moment, it looked like paradise. I ran the last few yards to my truck, threw my gear in the back, and locked the doors tight. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, waiting for my heart rate to return to normal. That was when I saw it, resting right there on the passenger seat, wide open, my field notebook. For 3 decades. That book has lived in the inner breast pocket of my heavy work vest. It never leaves my body. I do not set it down. Not to eat, not to sleep, never. It is the rule that keeps you alive in this profession. But there it was, lying open on the seat. With trembling hands, I reached out and picked it up. I flipped through the pages until I found my notes from that morning. One entire page was missing, torn out roughly at the spine. It was the page where I had written down the exact coordinates and description of that strange, empty campsite I found at the start of the day. I emptied my pockets. I tore apart my bags. I searched every inch of the truck. That page was gone. It had been taken. For 3 days, I tried to tell myself I was losing my mind. Fatigue, stress, dehydration. I tried every logical explanation, but logic wasn't enough. I needed proof that nothing had happened. I needed to know I was safe. So I went back. This time, the sun was high. This time, I brought another surveyor with me. I planned to show him the site, the fire ring, the boots, and finally put the fear to rest. When we arrived at the coordinates, there was nothing there. No blackened ring, no tarp, no water jugs, no boots. The ground was covered in undisturbed moss and leaf litter, looking exactly as if no human foot had ever touched it. My companion laughed and suggested I must have marked the location wrong in the dark. I almost agreed with him. I almost let the whole thing go. Then I lifted my eyes to the tree line. Tied neatly around a low-hanging branch, right above where the campfire would have been, was a strip of bright orange survey tape. It was fresh, clean, vividly bright against the bark. Tucked carefully beneath the knot was a small folded square of white paper. My colleague watched in silence as I pulled it free. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I unfolded the paper. There was no long message scrawled across it. No warning. No threat. Just a single line written in clear, sharp handwriting. My name. That is all. Just my name. Written by someone who was waiting for me to arrive. We left immediately. I handed in my report, took my payment, and never accepted another job in that region. My friends tell me it was a prank. Poachers, they say, or recluses protecting their territory. And maybe, in the cold light of day, there is a rational explanation for every single thing. But there is one question that has kept me awake at night for years. A question that logic cannot touch. If it was just pranksters, just men hiding in the trees. How did they know my name before I ever stepped foot in their swamp?